Mr. Seahorse by Eric Carle. Mr. and Mrs. Seahorse drifted gently through the sea. Mrs. Seahorse began to wiggle and twist this way and that. "It's time for me to lay my eggs," she said. "Can I help?" asked Mr. Seahorse. "Oh, yes, thank you," said Mrs. Seahorse, and she laid her eggs into a pouch on Mr. Seahorse's belly. "I'll take good care of our eggs," said Mr. Seahorse. "I promise." As Mr. Seahorse drifted gently through the sea, he passed right by a group of trumpet fish hidden in a patch of reeds. And if you take away the reeds, there are the trumpet fish. But before long, Mr. Seahorse met another fish. "How are you, Mr. Stickleback?" asked Mr. Seahorse. "Delighted," replied Mr. Stickleback. "I just built a nest, and right away Mrs. Stickleback laid her eggs into it. Now I am taking good care of them until they hatch." "Keep up the good work," said Mr. Seahorse, and he swam away. And there's Mr. Stickleback and his eggs. As Mr. Seahorse drifted gently through the sea, he passed right by a lionfish hidden behind a coral reef. But before long, Mr. Seahorse met another horse. "How are you, Mr. Tilapia?" asked Mr. Seahorse. Mr. Tilapia couldn't answer. His mouth was full of eggs. I know," said Mr. Seahorse. "Mrs. Tilapia laid her eggs. Now you are taking good care of them until they hatch." Mr. Tilapia nodded his head. "You must be very happy," said Mr. Seahorse, and he swam away. As Mr. Seahorse drifted gently through the sea, he passed right by several leaf fish hidden among the seaweed. And if we take away the seaweed, there they are. But before long, Mr. Seahorse met another fish. "How are you, Mr. Curtis?" asked Mr. Seahorse. "Perfectly fine," said Mr. Curtis. "Mrs. Curtis laid her eggs, and I have stuck them on my head. Now I am taking good care of them until they hatch." "You are doing a good job," said Mr. Seahorse, and he swam away. And there's Curtis fish with the babies on his head. And Mr. Seahorse is upside down. As Mr. Seahorse gently drifted through the sea, he passed right by a stonefish hidden behind a rock. Take away the rock. There's the stonefish. But before long, Mr. Seahorse met another fish. "How are you, Mr. Pipe?" he asked. "Couldn't be better," replied Mr. Pipe. "Mrs. Pipe laid her eggs along my belly. Now I'm taking good care of them until they hatch." "You should feel proud of yourself," said Mr. Seahorse, and he swam away. There are all the eggs on the belly. But before long, Mr. Seahorse met another fish. "How are you, Mr. Bullhead?" "Tip-top," said Mr. Bullhead. "Mrs. Bullhead laid her eggs and the eggs hatched. Now I'm babysitting." "You're doing a fine job," said Mr. Seahorse, and he swam on his way. The time had come for the Seahorse babies to be born. Mr. Seahorse wiggled and twisted this way and that, and at last the babies tumbled out from Mr. Seahorse's pouch and swam away. One baby turned around and tried to come back to the pouch. "Oh no," said Mr. Seahorse, "I do love you, but now you are ready to be on your own. The end.